So I had a friend who went on a rant on Facebook the other day about GoFundMe. And they take 2.39% of whatever's raised and 30 cents per donation. So my friend in Guatemala really needs GoFundMe. It's the only way she can get money for her. But what started her rant was that the George Floyd family has now raised $140 million in their GoFundMe. And there is no obligation to do anything with it other than keep it. There's no auditing, because it was a GoFundMe for their family.
Yeah.
And she's like, this is outrageous, blah, 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 blah. And I'm hoping they're going to do a lot of good with it. But it makes me think to be even more careful about where I give my money.
Right. Whether it's an organization that is doing something that you can verify, at least indirectly. Yeah, that totally makes sense, Judith.
Yeah, and I hadn't really thought about that. Also, I wanted to share that so I'm Jewish and I belong to a temple that has a sisterhood, and the sisterhood has a schmooze Zoom every Wednesday at 5:30, and their topic was, there's a Jewish expression, don't break the plate. And it means don't make a change that you can't reverse, you can't take back.
Wow.
So they were saying, let's talk about breaking the plate, how we have to make changes that are forward thinking, that we're never going to want to take back. And in the conversation, somebody shared something that I had not thought of. Maybe the three of you have already. But she said she was trying to put herself in the body of a Black person to see, what it was like. And she realized that, in a way, her experience with COVID-19 is the closest that she can come, because when she walks out, she's afraid to walk out the door. When she walks out the door, she's looking at every person coming towards her, not because they could attack her, but rather because they might not be wearing a mask. And it's not the same by any means, but it is a way to start thinking about, if every time you walked out your door you had fear, what would that feel like? And I had not thought about that, but it's given me a lot of food for thought, so to speak.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, thank you for bringing that up, because that is so fitting for our topic today, which was pretty heavy, even just getting this kind of organized, and definitely got some inspiration and felt even more moved by the people we're going to be talking about today because of Zach and his violin playing. But we are going to tell a little bit of the story of Elijah McClain. Have y'all heard about him yet? I hadn't either. And it's a tough story. He was picked up on the side of the road coming back from a convenience store and was put into a chokehold and was brain dead hours later because of complications. He is such a beautiful human being. We're going to talk a little bit about him. He taught himself how to play violin and guitar and would go to the local, animal shelter and play for the cats. He was just a gem of this really eccentric kid who was different. He had anemia, so he was like always cold when he go out at night. So he was like all bundled up. He wearing like a ski mask when he got somebody called, like a suspicious person is coming down our street. And
how old was he about?
I've got a post I'll share. He was a teenager, I want to say, like 19 or early 20s. I'm not completely sure.
And where is Jessica? I mean, knowing nothing about him.
Let me go ahead and share my screen. But what we're going to talk about today in the big picture is Elijah McClain. In his honor, we'll be drawing a violin. And Zach has also finished his piece, so to tie in the violin theme there, and as a bit of a memorial, Zach's going to play his completed composition that he started last week.
Oh, great.
But we're also going to be talking about others who have been murdered by the police, people who've been killed by police brutality. And I want to just go over the broad concepts. We're not going to get super into detail about the Abolish the Police movement and what it is and what people want when they say abolish the police. So that's our big picture plan. Let me tell you all a little bit more about Elijah. So I first heard about him just the other day from a friend of mine who lives in Colorado. This happened just outside of Denver in Aurora, Colorado. And I did post a link to this particular article in the group under the Zoom call link. Now, this is, I thought, a very moving piece. It was written by a journalist who just kind of was broken from being emotionally exhausted from sharing so much horrifying news. And it talks about how, this is Elijah McClain playing for the cats in his local, animal place. What do you call those things?
Yeah.
And there was a book that kept coming to me while I was reading his story, which I really encourage you to read this article. It's Malcolm Gladwell's book, Talking to Strangers, which centers around the story of Sandra Bland. And Sandra Bland is a woman, if you haven't heard of her, this was years ago, who was pulled over, not really for doing anything. She had changed lanes because there was a police car coming up behind her. And when the police car got behind her, he just pulled her over because she was a suspicious Black woman driving a car. They kind of got into this heated conversation. And the next thing you know, she was in jail. And the next thing you know, she had committed suicide in jail. And what Malcolm Gladwell does is he pulls apart, why did this interaction turn so sour to where the police officer felt he needed to arrest her for, really, she committed absolutely no crime. But it was the attitude, it was the way they were talking to each other. And the book is just really incredible and sheds a lot of light on how we interact as human beings who come from different backgrounds. And that's a lot of the basis for what goes wrong whenever the police interact with people of color. It's definitely what happened in this scenario. This kid was different. And those were some of his very last words. He's like, I'm not trying to do anything, I'm just different. And he was repeating that over and over again. There is some really disturbing imagery from the body cameras that the police were wearing. If you do want to dive into that more, I'm not going to play it today, but.
And you sent us the link to all of this?
Absolutely. He was a vegetarian. He was eccentric. He had anemia. He was like one of those kids that, you would probably think is a little goofy if you met him. And his reaction when the police met him, because of the way police are trained to sort of assume that you need to be extra suspicious and on guard and anybody could be a murderer, I don't know, really goes into it in that book by Malcolm Gladwell, Talking to Strangers. The next thing you know, he was in a chokehold and he was trying to establish boundaries. He was saying, I'm an introvert, please give me some space. And instead they pinned him to the ground and put him in a carotid chokehold. This story is coming up a little extra hot right now because of some really disrespectful photos that other police officers have taken in that area.
And this was in the 1960s?
No, this was a year ago.
Scroll back up for a minute because it said, stop. You went too far. I thought it said down a little. I thought it said the 1960s.
In the article, they might be referring, they might be referring to
the picture of the police, it's tuned.
The banality of evil. So this is just part of the article.
Okay.
Connecting this to other um, evils of the past. Definitely the connection between the Nazis. But this was really hard to see also. And this was June 28th, 2020, in a violin memorial that was trying to bring justice for Elijah McClain. The officers still have not had any repercussions for this guy's murder. And this is what happened at the violin memorial.
What the heck?
You've got to be kidding me. No!
It's really hard to watch.
What happened? What was the end of that?
So I did look into why this, yeah, a little bit more background. And apparently at the same time at the police department, there were other protesters who were, you know, protesting around the police fields. And so the police force in that city wanted to shut down everything going on related to anything, and so they stormed this with the riot gear, even though it was completely peaceful and unrelated to what was going on in the other part of the city. It just became anyone who was protesting at all was the enemy, and you know they were like throwing in tear gas in what was a peaceful protest. So we're in a really scary, sad place in America right now. And I think this tension between the police and protesters and people who are trying to, you know, use their First Amendment right for free speech and, you know, demand justice are really, it's hard right now. So what I wanted to explore today, in a second we're going to be drawing the violin in remembrance, was the concept of abolishing the police. And that's something that when I first heard it was like, what? Like, abolish the police? That seems a little extreme. Like, why would you do that? Like, the police keep us safe because, of course, we're white people, and that has generally been our experience. But the more I've been researching and learning, and I invite you, please, to do the same, it's really fascinating how, you know, if you look back at police history, it began actually as a way to control people who had just been freed from slavery, and it has a dark and racist background of trying to control Black people after abolition. But then the police force just grew, and every single problem that a city would have just started being tossed toward police departments. So instead of more specialized care for different situations, it was just like, okay, well, have the police handle it, have the police handle it. And even police forces are frustrated by this, and they're like, you know, we weren't trained to handle every single situation. But what's happened is when you put every problem under police control, budgets just swell like crazy for police forces. So police are tasked with handling everything from actual real crime to mental health issues, domestic disputes, anything and everything that you think of when you call 911 that might just be like, my cat's up a tree. So this was very helpful for me and this is a few examples of what would it look like if we did abolish the police, if there were no police. Like, you know, you're like, well, what do you do really if there's an emergency? So this went pretty big on the social media, these examples of what might happen. So your friends are intoxicated and fighting, but you don't want them to get in trouble. Imagine you call 311, so just a different number, and a crisis intervention team comes to your door. 1 hour later, your friends are sleeping it off at home. So when people say abolish the police, they're not saying like complete anarchy, everybody's going to run around and there'll be no safety net for our community members, but it would be funding other social workers, other specifically trained people to come in and help specific to the situation at hand. So you are, another example, you are experiencing a mental health crisis and you're afraid. Imagine you call 311 and a first responder trained in mental health comes to your door. 1 hour later, you're in a safe place with your consent with plans for follow-up care. Another example, some folks are sleeping on benches in the park. Imagine a city employee comes by and checks in with them to see if they need a place to sleep, food, water, or health care. An hour later, those who want a different place to sleep have one. And that is so very different than the model that we have where homelessness has been criminalized in many cases, where people who are homeless are put in an even greater jeopardy from getting a ticket or having some financial penalization for what's already like not a situation they probably want to be in. And it goes on and on. I'll definitely have to post this. But let's say someone seems to be snooping in your car windows on your block. Imagine calling your neighbors who are trained in self-defense and de-escalation and approaching the person. An hour later, the conflict is resolved and the person responsible is getting the support they need. So what would happen in a scenario where the police are abolished would be completely different than the way we think of protecting our communities now. But it would still involve trained people coming to help in a situation where something needs assistance. And I'll be posting some more links. You can really dig into this if you're interested. What I've been finding is interested is that people are really calling for abolition, like New Age abolitionists, because in the end, you might have heard of this 8 Can't Wait campaign. It's like different ways to 8 reforms that could happen now to reduce police killings, they say. However, in the end, and this paragraph explains it, they believe this campaign is dangerous and irresponsible, offering a slate of reforms that have already been tried and failed, that mislead a public newly invigorated to the possibilities of police and prison abolition, that do not reflect the needs of criminalized communities. One of the big complaints about the 8 Can't Wait campaign is that it's really still using different things we've already tried that haven't been working, and it still continues to use the police as this basically militarized force, as opposed to shifting away from a punitive measure and having like militarized protection, as opposed to these different approaches that do not basically, it's that idea of if you've got a hammer, you know, everything starts to look like a nail. And if you're sending in an armed force and people who've been trained to look for criminals and send people to jail, like every problem that they see is going to look like, okay, well, let's like put this kid in a chokehold and send him to jail, as opposed to, okay, this is a person who maybe has some kind of mental health thing or is just different. Let's have a de-escalating conversation. A lot of the de-escalation training that they have promoted in like the 8 Can't Wait campaign, it just hasn't been shown to work. So this is like a really broad and brief overview. What are y'all's thoughts on all of that?
It was very hard to see the violin vigil being interrupted. I grew up giving those kind of performances, but I was 7 when I first started doing group recitals, and that was really hard for me.
Mm.
It was really
Just
hard.
that juxtaposition, absolutely. Thank you for sharing, Zach. But to see something where, artists are sharing a beautiful remembrance and putting out what I think is some of the most beautiful kind of energy that you can when you're taking time to spread a beauty, like the beauty of sound, and to remember someone, and it just is so extreme to see the darkness of armed police coming in, and why would you break that up? It was very shocking to see, and I'm just surprised. I just heard about this yesterday, but this is a campaign that's been going on for a year, and only one more name to add to what is already much too long of a list. Have y'all also been hearing about Brianna Taylor, Black woman who was asleep in her home and murdered because she just happened to be at the wrong place in the wrong time? But
The police were at the wrong place at the wrong time. She was in her home.
thank you. I was like, that doesn't sound right as I'm saying it. Is it Ahmed Aubrey, a jogger, and there are just so many people. And what also I've been hearing often is, we hear about the extreme cases, George Floyd, of course, but as a Black person, to exist in a world where that comes up on the news, if you can only imagine what their day-to-day experience is, and that goes back to what Judith was talking about in the beginning with her friend trying to put herself in a Black person's shoes, that extreme alertness all the time that we now have with coronavirus. If you could imagine walking out of your door and constantly being on high alert, what that holds in your body. I'm currently listening to this amazing podcast. It's called Dissect, and it looks really deeply at musical albums, and tells the story of every single thing you can imagine. This is about Beyonce's Lemonade album, and which dives really deeply into themes of slavery, modern police brutality, and her own personal relationship. It's an incredible album, won tons of awards. But one of the statistics that they shared yesterday, or when I was listening to it, was that the average Black person, you can see the aging from stress in their genetic code, that they the average Black person, just because of the day-to-day anxiety of existing in this system, is aged 6 years more than the average white person. So it adds up, and it is hurting people. It is killing people beyond just the murders that are happening. So it's a lot. It's very, it's hard to hear, but also this is in itself a privilege that we are having a hard conversation and being able to learn about it as opposed to experiencing it every single day. So on that note, I thought we could just kind of continue this discussion a little bit while we draw. And I'm going to pop up on the screen a photograph. You see that all right?
Oh, that's beautiful.
Mm.
I mean, I was feeling tense in the conversation, and just seeing that photo kind of brought me down.
Wow.
It's beautiful.
So, as always, draw to your best ability. You know me, start with the big picture first. Think about how you want to frame it on your page.
Wow.
So are you having conversations, each of you, with your friends outside of this class?
I am.
Mm-hmm.
I'm trying to. Yes. Long story short, yes. There is a, what's it called? I have a text thread that I keep up with a bunch of different people, and we reflect. But it's gotten less frequent over, like, I don't know, the last month or so. But
I think what's been tricky, and one of the reasons I want to have this class, but also get it out more, is I don't see my friends anymore. I've noticed, unfortunately, that I've been just less and less in contact, even through phone, with a lot of my best friends, and so yeah, that has been limiting as far as talking about these kinds of things. But I talk to it with, like, my parents, you guys.
We have a friend of our son's visiting. Our son and daughter-in-law have been very awakening, and have been educating themselves, and had listened to information about the whole question of reparations, and they'd read and studied some things different than what I've done. Anyway, the friend Pat grew up in Taunton, Massachusetts, and he is white, grew up though near the projects, were mostly Black. And he said when he was in school, he would be the only white kid sitting with a table of Black kids. And I said, well, were there other white kids in the school? He said, oh yes, but I was friends with the Black kids because they were my neighbors. They were the ones I grew up with. So it's been an education for him in a different way to realize that even though he certainly wasn't racist in his personal life, that he did discover that he was living in a white privilege, in a racist culture. So, we've had some very interesting conversations while he's here. So I really appreciate the wakefulness of some people more than I am, as well as ones that I'm talking to who haven't read or studied as much.
Yeah, we're all at different phases and levels of awakening. I think that's a great way to put it, Carol, because that really is what anti-racist work is all about, is acknowledging, like, there's always more to be done. It's not a, like, switch that you flip where you go from, like, being racist to suddenly, like, not racist, or even anti-racist. It's a journey.
Well, I think it's the hugest wake-up call for me has been to learn the difference between non-racist and anti-racist, because I never did feel that I was racist, and I certainly wasn't a segregationist, but I've had to take a hard look at to what extent I've probably been an assimilationist.
Interesting. And what do you how do you
mean by that exactly?
Yeah, thank you.
Well, the term, well, I mean, I'm using, and I need to reread his book because I've been racing through it like a whodunit. It's Kendi's book.
Yeah, How to Be an Anti-Racist.
And his description of assimilationism, meaning that, yeah, Black people will be fine when they get educated and are more like us white people. And that, the assimilationist sees the Black person as improvable, in quotes. It's so arrogant.
So it's about imposing white culture, white values, white ways of being, very much a colonial model where we've come across these others and we need to make them assimilate into our way of being. And that reminds me of a conversation I know my mom had with my grandmother the other day. And I'm really proud of my mom. I've been talking to her about this stuff, and she's been sharing it with her mom. They talk every morning. So they were talking about the Ebonics conversation. And she said, well, Mom, do you know what Ebonics is? And she's like, no, I don't believe I do know what that is. She's got this cute little South Carolina accent. And she said, well, when you hear like this, you might probably think of it as a slang or that kind of different way that African Americans speak. That is Ebonics. It's actually its own language and dialect, and it follows certain rules, and it has its own grammar. It's a language. Those people are bilingual. And her mother, my grandmother, just said, oh, I just always thought that they just needed to learn how to speak right,
Yes,
Unfortunately,
that's exactly
racist. Yeah.
I did too.
Sure.
I did too.
Mm-hmm.
I highly recommend, if you have time, to watch that movie I sent the link to, or the movie of the play.
Which one?
The link wasn't working when I tried it, but I bet I can find it somehow.
Just Google Les Blancs. The version from the National Theatre in London.
Okay.
You've put up a link, Judith?
I did, and I posted it in our
in
class.
The racist art class. Yeah.
Okay, I'll look for it. So even if the link doesn't work, we can go find it.
Around.
This is an excellent form drawing exercise for symmetry. Holy mackerel.
I know, it's
I'm
hard.
having a lot of trouble with it.
Looking at violins your whole life, is it easier for you?
Is it easy? No, I'm basically just like making a cross section. Like I'm just like trying to get the proportions right.
Yeah.
After having for so many years talked to different violin makers, just the amount of precision and artistry and and the mathematics involved in creating an instrument as perfectly imperfect as the violin. It's pretty incredible. What's actually interesting is that if you're looking at it straight on, the right side of the violin is usually a little bit. It is not perfectly symmetrical. The right side of the violin is actually a little bit more robust. Like it has actually a little bit more length to it. I don't know how best, or width. I guess it would be width. Pardon me. It's a little bit wider from the fingerboard to the outer bout. That is actually a little bit wider than the left side.
You're right. Amazing.
Yeah. And I think that just has to do with the what's it called? The energy being released by that little F hole, and that is the closest side to the closest side to the audience.
What's the F hole?
The F hole is the little hole next to the strings that go down from the top all the way, then about the middle point. Those two little squiggly looking lines, those are actually holes in the top plate, and that's where the sound leaves the instrument.
Yeah, these really are works of art in themselves. Such a beautiful instrument.
My friend's son makes guitars.
Ooh.
And makes guitars. And he talks about the wood and the proportions all the time. It's such an art.
I have one of my friends has a brother who's a violin maker, and they are from South Africa.
Oh.
And it's so interesting because Glenn, we've been friends for decades, just grew up, with their black maid, and it was totally normal to drop her off at the other beach before they went to their beach and all of that. But, she's obviously gone through a lot of changes since then. But her brother made a set of violins and, no, I'm sorry, a whole, a set of violin, viola, and cello for a quartet, and he named the instruments after Black leaders. There was the Tutu, Desmond Tutu, I can't remember which instrument was which leader.
I'd like to look him up.
Brian Lysus, Lysus. He lives in California now. Yeah, he's an exquisite violin, makes exquisite instruments. I mean, he was trying to, I mean, these instruments are worth a great deal. I don't know, I haven't followed up, Zach, what's happened with them. I mean, he was trying to have, they're the kind of instrument that a consortium should have, and then, you know, give out or loan out to players the way some instruments are handled. It's making me want to look it up myself, see what's happened with them.
Website. Very nice website.
Oh, you see, found it already. Great. Yeah, it's been so interesting to talk to Glenn, you know, as I say, just about this normalcy of it when you grow up in that.
I think that's what's so scary to think about, is just how things become normalized, and you become insensitized to real injustice. And I was thinking, I'm sure you've been hearing people just talk about, like, well, what would you have done, or what would it feel like if we were back in 1850, or in times where slavery still existed. And you like to think, like, oh, I would have been an abolitionist and da 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 da, but statistically, really, that was such a small minority, and it was so rare for people to go against the norm, because it was a norm. Like, it just, people tend to want to keep doing things the way they've been done, and I try to remember that when I get lazy about trying to do something a little bit more activist, or, you know, write a letter to my local government. There's a big Confederate statue up in front of our courthouse, and I saw it whenever I went to go vote the other day, and it was just like, I think in the moment, like, I'm going to go write that letter right now, and then, you know, you get busy with all these other things, and then the next thing you're like, oh shoot, I still haven't written that letter yet. And I'm like, this is my white privilege showing. Like, I need to actually take action on this and be active in abolitionist style work, or just like that idea of, like, trying to make change.
Mm-hmm.
That's part of what's interesting in the conversations. I mean, you know, being in my mid 70s and sitting with a friend last night who's a couple of years older, and I said, you know, I'm doing some of the work, but not like some of my friends who are like, even like you, Jessica, you're doing a lot more reading and thinking and meditating on all this, and I'm just not. And there's this thing of, there's not much I can do to change anything other than just be mindful, which is what I'm trying to be.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm not one of those people who's going to march across New York with thousands of people not wearing masks. And
Sure.
you know, it's very interesting to see how your mind works about these things.
Yeah. But
Important. I'm sorry. It's just whenever the opportunity comes to reinforce the right knowledge and the right information. So, like, the fact that we're all here doing this, like, it just reinforces the right cultural shift. You know, like, the amount of action that we do is very, you know, it's dependent on our age and our abilities and what we're able to, you know, be like. I guess the actionable impetus is different for everybody. But if there is a what's it called? If there is the consensus, like a cultural consensus, and we reaffirm it in the best ways we can. I think that's the goal.
Hmm.
Mhm.
I'm trying not to beat myself up about these things.
Yeah. But having conversations is a really big deal. I think it's a bigger deal than we think it is. Um, because in the past, when this type of stuff would come up, when people slip something a little bit racist out and people just let it slide, or maybe we didn't even know that we were saying something that would be considered offensive to a person who is hearing it, that is creating the cultural norm. This is all just a big kind of, we're all just living out this almost like a play that's been scripted, and there's these unspoken rules and like ways of understanding. And when we can kind of start to shift that even a little bit, there's a ripple effect. I didn't realize anything I was talking to my mom about, what we talked about in these classes, was going anywhere. But then the next thing I know, she's talking to her mom, and I don't know if my grandma is talking to her friends, but
I'm glad you said that, because the same woman who went on a rant about GoFundMe
mm,
then went on a rant because of the 140 million that George Floyd's family raised, and then went on a rant about him. He'd been arrested 8 times, and he'd been a drug dealer, and he had been this, and he'd been that. So first I said to myself, I'm just not going to respond. I mean, I'm outraged by what she's saying, but what good is it for me to make her wrong?
right.
And then I thought, I have to say something, because if I don't say something and call her on it, I'm not.
You're kind of implicit in the silence.
Right. I'm kind of, I can't think of the right word, but I'm a co-conspirator. If I don't point out to her that it doesn't matter what his background was, it doesn't matter how many times he was arrested. Nobody should be killed the way he was killed.
Right. That's just not what our judicial and system that we've all agreed on in this country says is okay. It's
Right. So I did. I wrote to her, and I was kind of afraid of what I'd get back, but
sure.
but it was okay. We had a good dialogue about it.
That's awesome, Judith.
Yeah,
Thank you for the second half of the story. That's we're really inspiring. How are y'all's vibe?
It will be really interesting to see what that family decides to do with the money. I mean,
I know.
That's really, as you pointed out, different than giving to, like a ACLU or Black
Right.
Lives Matter, or somebody who they're working in a certain way.
Well, in the end, GoFundMe, it's individuals. They decide to give their money to whoever they want to give their money to, and who is anybody to judge what?
Oh no, there's a big
I'm
difference.
not judging the people who are giving the money. I'm curious to know
Like
where
what
it's going to go. Yeah, where it's going to go.
Yeah, if I give to Black Lives, to the George Floyd family in the first week, when they were raising money for the funeral and things like that, that's different than finding out a month later that they raised $140 million. And I would hope that my money was not going to pay for ballet school, per se.
Although I challenge that, because so what if it goes to paying for ballet school? Because I'm also thinking about how often people sue police or anybody if there's any type of harm that comes to their family, or if somebody dies and people sue, right?
Yeah.
For the money, which is for emotional, whatever they call it, settling the emotional debt, basically a form of reparations. And I would also think this family and whoever is connected to them has just been thrust into this huge spotlight, not just in the moment, but in history. And I can't imagine what a challenge that in itself is going to be.
It almost is like, I mean, there's you lose your, like you're saying, Jessica, that you lose your anonymity, and your sense of privacy, and for the rest of time, they have lost.
Yeah.
And
That's true. I appreciate what you're both saying, or what you're all saying.
I mean, I've listened to a lot of, like, I mean, this is not really, I don't know. I'll just say it. I mean, they're athletes who talk about how they can't go out, you know, and the Floyd family is going to be iconic, but like, I don't know. I guess the reparations. I don't know. I feel like it's something to consider.
Well, I mean, I first of all didn't know about the fundraising, and second of all hadn't thought about it deeply. So I appreciate your input.
How are y'all's violins coming along?
I am absolutely struggling with imperfection.
It ties in well with our other class, right, Zach?
Right.
Really,
Well, especially, I'm sure you know the violin better than any of us, so.
I do. So I'm erasing every 5 seconds.
Oh no.
Oh yeah.
See, and I'm probably
Use a pen. Don't use a pencil.
Yeah. Woohoo, Judith.
I'm on my iPad, so it's easy. Like, it's kind of.
Oh, not fair.
You're just pushing the undo button. Yeah, I find pen very liberating, because you're not able to erase, and so you just have to find a way to make what you did work, and be really careful when you put down those first few lines. I think I'm just about, and I really want to hear Zach's piece today. I haven't done this much cross-hatching in a long time. I think this machine probably wouldn't be playable though. The thing that I'm All right, y'all. This photo is on the website.
Are you taking it away now?
I'm about to take it away. I'm gonna give y'all a minute more. Of course, now I'm like stepping back from it. I want to just keep going. Eeps.
Oh.
It's a complicated subject, no doubt.
You were cross-hatching? Where were you cross-hatching?
I'll show you in a second here, Judith. I hope it's not too confusing. I'm trying to just, anywhere that there's any darker values, I'm cross-hatching. It's just hard to differentiate between the cross-hatching lines and the lines that are just the violin strings.
Trying to get the violin strings white against black.
Yes.
I ordered some white gel pens.
Oh.
They're not coming in until later today.
Oh, today, nice.
Yeah,
Man, just missed it.
I ordered them after we were talking at the Tuesday class.
Oh, fun.
I have one, but sometimes I find that it just doesn't work the way I want it to. And I'm like, ugh, frustrated.
Well, I'll have to experiment and make sure I don't, like do some scratch work.
Yes, definitely do that.
Always experiment. Yes.
Oh.
Well, I got out my colored pencils. That was my cheat for dark.
That's so interesting. It looks like the left side of my violin is actually pretty okay, but the right side is just ugh. Anyway,
All right, y'all. I'm about to take it down. I want to see what y'all been up to. Oh, there's just one more line, couple lines I'll do. Okay. All right. We have to stop. I have to have room for sharing and Zach's performance. So here's what I ended up with.
Oh,
Wow.
nice.
Oh, the fretboard really works. Or I guess it's not frets on the violin, but
This is my favorite part. Yeah.
yeah. But I mean, you got your strings in there. You can see the strings against the dark.
That was tricky. Judith, let me pop you up here.
I didn't do any shading yet.
Okay. No, it's beautiful.
No
Wow.
shading though.
That might be better done with like a watercolor, little splash of color here, there. Zach. Oh, hey, hold
Ah.
it. Yeah,
You
you're
were definitely going for precision.
Mm-hmm. He probably wants something actually playable by the end.
Very good.
Wow.
I was surprised by the proportions of it. I was doing that same kind of trying to measure bit by bit, and I thought that the string part would be longer, but Carol, you want to show off a little bit?
Yeah. Well, as I say, I reached my colored
Progress.
to get some color.
Ooh, lovely.
Nice.
nice.
Well,
Very nice.
it was hard. I think it only has 3 strings because the dark. I couldn't get the dark on the fingering part to fine enough to get a 4th string in.
Will you post the violin so we can finish it?
I already did.
Okay.
If you look at where I put the Zoom link, it's underneath that, but maybe I should just post the picture on its own as well.
Have any of you been able to get Mighty Network on your desktops?
Yes, but it's not like a app. It's just, you just type in school.jessicaantonelli.com. So it's like just a URL you go to.
School.antonelli.com.
Jessica Antonelli.
Say it again so I can write it down.
Yep. School.
Yep.
Dot Jessica Antonelli.com. Zach, how are you playing silently?
Thank you.
Really muted.
Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Yes. Eagerly.
So the title of the piece is "Today I Must Mourn," and it is the probably one of the more poignant lines, at least to my recollection, of Frederick Douglass's "What to a Slave is the 4th of July" speech.
Wow. Zach, that is amazing. You should put that up on YouTube for people to hear. It's really beautiful.
Thank you so much for sharing and for creating that.
Yeah.
Very special.
Oh, I am so glad to be a part of this class and this group and the Antonelli community. I never would have written it if it weren't for last week's class.
It's really special.
And it really, I mean, I can't tell you how much it extra broke my heart to find out about this young man who was learning violin and, you know, to have connected with you, Zach, and just to understand the spirit of the, you know, a violinist and what an emotional instrument it is, and like the dedication and the type, it just really, it really hit home. So thank you for connecting that to Elijah's story. I'm glad we could all get to tell his story today to remember him and make something out of it, hopefully. So
Thank you, Jessica.
So you posted the article about Elijah? Okay.
there are many. I posted the one that really hit home for me. I think what I was really moved by is that particular author, or yeah, he just was writing. It was kind of this guy who's just throwing away, like, okay, I know I'm supposed to have some journalistic distance here, but I can't anymore. This is too much. Like, this kid was too special, and what happened is too tragic. And I mean, it was a very moving piece. I was like bawling the whole time. So it's hard hearing these stories stack up, and you know, it's like one name after the other, and it's just so much information. It's numbing, and it's hard to connect. And so this particular story really, yeah, it was very moving. So I'm glad we could share it and have an actual violinist to have a little memorial today. So
I don't know whether any of you have seen it, but my friends have all been talking about, and this talk group is going to watch it this week. There's a Nina Simone docudrama on Netflix, and I understand it's very powerful. So I haven't seen it yet, but just share that.
Yeah, music is such a beautiful and powerful way to share these stories and connect emotionally. Well, thank you guys for being here. Have such a beautiful weekend, and I will see you next week.
Yes,
Everybody.
thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye, everyone.
Bye.